Okay, so this mini lesson is going to take the products of glycolysis and we're going to go through pyruvate oxidation and the citric acid cycle. So now that the pyruvate, the product of our glycolysis reaction, pyruvate is going to enter the mitochondrium of the cell. But in order for it to be used in the citric acid cycle, it needs to undergo oxidation. So we have something called pyruvate oxidation take place. So pyruvate, you take a look at our 3-carbon chain, our input, it's going to undergo a reaction where the product of the reaction is going to form carbon dioxide as well as acetic acid. So acetic acid is a 2-carbon chain molecule. So we have one of the carbons being released as carbon dioxide, and then the other carbons, 2 carbons, are going to form acetic acid. Now that acetic acid will combine with a coenzyme. That coenzyme is known as coenzyme A, and it will form something called acetyl-CoA. So acetyl-CoA includes the coenzyme A as well as the acetic acid. So you can see in our output here, the acetyl-CoA is just, the coenzyme A is just this labeled purple thing, but then you can see the 2 carbons in acetic acid that are attached. Now, in order for this to happen, we're going to have the pyruvic acid undergo oxidation. So what is oxidation again? Oxidation, we are losing electrons, oil rig. So those electrons are gained by our NAD plus to form NADH. So in this process, we end up with some carbon dioxide, some NADH, and something called acetyl-CoA. So here is another visual. We have our 3-carbon pyruvate from glycolysis in the cytoplasm of the cell. It's going to cross through the membrane of the mitochondrium into the mitochondrial matrix. And it's going to undergo pyruvate oxidation, where we have carbons that is going to be released to form carbon dioxide. And then the 2-carbon chain is now acetic acid, which will combine with a coenzyme A to form acetyl-CoA. And in that whole process, we have NAD plus gaining another 2 electrons. Okay, so that NADH will then continue to the last stage of the cellular respiration. So we're going to take a closer look now at that acetyl-CoA. So that's going to move into the citric acid cycle. Okay, so here we have our input. So which molecule on the figure below has been reduced? So if you take a look at the process, which one's reduced? Which one has gained electrons? Because of oil rig, reduction is gaining electrons. Is it the pyruvic acid? Nope, that one's being oxidized. Is it the coenzyme A? Nope, it's just a coenzyme. Is it the acetyl-CoA? Nope, that one didn't gain any electrons. It's the NAD plus got reduced to NADH. So that's where those electrons ended up. All right, so now that we have taken our acetyl-CoA, we're going to take that and further break it down to form carbon dioxide, okay, through something called the citric acid cycle. So the citric acid cycle, it used to be referred to as the Krebs cycle. You may have, if you look at old anatomy textbooks or any biology textbooks, it may refer to as Krebs cycle. We no longer use that name. So you should see in modern textbooks that it's called the citric acid cycle, but just realize that if you ever hear of Krebs, it's referring to citric acid cycle. So the citric acid cycle is going to further break down pyruvate into our carbon dioxide. And in the process, it's going to generate some ATP, some NADH, and another electron carrier called FADH2 for every pyruvate. So when we ended glycolysis, how many pyruvates did we end with? So one glucose molecule broke into two pyruvate molecules. So when we're talking about the citric acid cycle, we're going to end with, for every pyruvate molecule, we're going to end up with two carbon dioxides, some ATP, some NADH, and some FADH2. Okay. Oh, these are steps. I'm like, we didn't end up with 3 ATP. Excuse me, I was confused there for a second. So when we're using these figures over here, realize that this is happening twice, because for every glucose we have two pyruvates undergoing the citric acid cycle. Okay. So here's a good figure that kind of summarizes it. So we start out with our product of glycolysis, our pyruvate, and then it undergoes pyruvic oxidation or pyruvate oxidation. And now we have our acetyl-CoA. So that acetyl-CoA is going to enter the citric acid cycle. So I should say the acetic acid is going to enter the citric acid cycle. The coenzyme gets released. And during that process, it's a series of reactions that occur. And we end up releasing carbon dioxide, two of those carbon dioxide molecules, because CO2, so that's one carbon molecule. So the acetic acid gets broken down, and we end up with our carbon dioxide, 2 carbon dioxide for every acetic acid. We also have the electrons that were stripped from that process get gained by NAD plus to form NADH. So we have 3 NADH forming. We also have ATP forming, and we have 1 FADH2 forming from FAD. So that one's going to gain some electrons as well. So at the end of this reaction, we have for every 2 pyruvates, okay, remember we start with 1 glucose, so 2 pyruvates will enter this cycle. We double the numbers. So we'll end up with 4 carbon dioxide, 6 NADH, 2 ATP, and 2 FADH2s. So this is occurring in the mitochondrium, and we're producing a total of 2 ATP from this process. Okay, all right. So thank your lucky stars that you're not in a majors biology course, because you'd have to memorize this whole complicated process. Okay, so you don't have to memorize this whole complicated process. You don't need to know what each stage is and what all of these molecules are called. But just recognize that we have some recycling going on. It is a cycle. It is a recurring cycle. So our 2 carbon molecule is going to enter the cycle, and it's going to bond with a 4 carbon chain. And you don't need to memorize the name of that to form a 6 carbon chain. Again, you don't need to memorize the name of that. And then that 6 carbon chain is going to start to be broken apart. And as it's breaking apart, we're going to have electrons transferred to NADH. We're going to have carbon dioxide released. We're going to have ATP form. We're going to have more electrons be added to an electron carrier called FADH2, and some more NADH form. Okay. But don't memorize any of the molecules that are carbon-based, okay? Because that's just going to get confusing for you. But just realize the inputs and the outputs. So there's the inputs, 2 acetyl-CoAs, and there's the outputs, carbon dioxide, ATP, NADH, and FADH2. And I should mention that we have 2 acetyl-CoAs, and so we're going to end up with, I should have written down, I'll do that right now. Acetyl-CoA has 2 carbons. We have 2 of them. So that means that we're going to end up with 4 carbon dioxides in the end. So we have 4 carbon dioxides, 2 ATP, 6 NADH, 2 FADH2. So we have those electron carriers, NADH and FADH2 will carry those electrons for further usage, and then the ATP is formed as well. Carbon dioxide will eventually get released as a byproduct through respiration. Okay. So far we have netted 2 ATP from glycolysis and 2 ATP from the citric acid cycle. So we've netted 4 ATP. So what is the total number of NADH molecules generated during the complete breakdown of 1 glucose molecule to 6 molecules of carbon dioxide? So how much did we end up with? So we got 2 from glycolysis. We netted no, so we're talking about NADH. I was thinking of ATP. I get easily distracted. So we're looking at the total number of NADH that we've ended up with. So in glycolysis, how many net NADH did we form? So we ended up with 2 NADH from glycolysis. How many from pyruvate oxidation? We got 1 of them. And then what about the citric acid cycle? We ended up with 6. So far we've gotten, actually I made a mistake. We got 1 NADH for every pyruvate oxidation. Since we had 2 pyruvate oxidations take place, that's 2. So now we've ended up with 10 NADH so far. Okay, so 2 from glycolysis, 2 from pyruvate oxidation, and 6 from NADH. Okay.